the silent scream. Arlington High was a typical suburban school. Cheerful, bustling hallways, laughter echoing between classes. But beneath this lively surface festered a darkness that few acknowledged. Nathan, a quiet and introverted student, moved like a shadow among his peers, easily overlooked. Josh, the school's golden boy, took pleasure in Nathan's invisibility, using it to torment him relentlessly. One day, during lunch, Josh humiliated Nathan in front of the entire cafeteria, knocking his tray to the floor and calling him pathetic. Laughter erupted, but in Nathan's eyes, a quiet fury was born, hidden behind a mask of calm. Nathan's mind was a labyrinth of calculated revenge. He began his plan with quiet whispers, rumors carefully seeded among Josh's closest friends. It started small. A hint that Josh had badmouthed them behind their backs, subtle suggestions that he was hiding something. Nathan fed lies with surgical precision, each one designed to erode trust without raising suspicion. As the days passed, the cracks began to show. Josh noticed the sideways glances, the sudden silences when he entered a room. His friends, once inseparable, grew distant, their loyalty corroded by the seeds Nathan had sown. Confusion twisted into paranoia as Josh tried to confront his friends, only to be met with evasive answers and growing hostility. The confident jock, who once ruled the school, began to unravel. He spent sleepless nights replaying conversations, analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning. His schoolwork slipped, his grades plummeted, but worse was the constant, gnawing feeling that everyone was turning against him. Nathan watched from the shadows, his face impassive, as Josh's world crumbled. The once popular boy was becoming a stranger to everyone, even to himself. And Nathan knew this was just the beginning. Nathan's vengeance deepened, as he exploited Josh's unraveling mind with even more precision. He began leaving notes in Josh's locker, cryptic messages that seemed to confirm Josh's worst fears. Sometimes they were threats, other times just nonsense, but always in a way that made Josh doubt what was real. In the hallways, Nathan would whisper Josh's name, just loud enough for him to hear, then vanish into the crowd. Josh's paranoia grew into a living thing, haunting him at every turn. Shadows flickered in his peripheral vision, and voices echoed in the empty spaces around him, taunting and accusatory. His once solid academic performance nosedived, and his teachers whispered in concern. But the real terror lay in the isolation. Josh's friends had all but disappeared, leaving him alone in a school where he had once been king. The popular crowd now treated him like a leper, avoiding his gaze, talking behind his back. The walls seemed to close in on him, trapping him in a maze of his own fears. Ms. Carter, the school counselor, finally took notice of Josh's deteriorating state, but her attempts to reach him were futile. Josh was too far gone, his mind a battleground of whispers and shadows, where reality and nightmare bled together. The tension reached its breaking point when Josh, now a shadow of his former self, finally snapped. Cornering Nathan in an empty hallway, his eyes wild and desperate, Josh accused him of orchestrating the nightmare his life had become. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and fear, veins pulsing in his temples as he demanded answers, desperate for any shred of sanity. But Nathan only looked at him with a cold, calm gaze, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. He denied everything, feigning innocence with such sincerity that it twisted the knife deeper into Josh's mind. "Maybe it's all in your head," Nathan whispered, his voice laced with mock concern. Josh's hands shook, his mind teetering on the edge of madness, unable to distinguish between truth and paranoia. His final cry for help was met with the same silence that had been his only companion for weeks. The confrontation shattered what little was left of Josh's sanity. Shortly after, Josh was institutionalized, labeled a danger to himself and others. His once bright future extinguished, he was left to languish in a sterile, padded room, haunted by the echoes of his own mind. As Nathan walked away from the school, a chilling smile crept across his face. This was never just about revenge. It was a calculated dismantling of a bully, executed with the precision of a surgeon. Nathan had won, and as he disappeared into the crowd, it was clear he always had. The Ritual. Salem, Massachusetts, was a town where the past seemed to cling to the present, its history of which trials casting long shadows over its cobblestone streets. For Emily, a shy and artistic girl, the town's eerie atmosphere was a reflection of her own life, isolated and overshadowed by the cruel presence of Rachel, the queen bee of the local high school. Rachel's bullying was relentless, her latest humiliation leaving Emily in tears, her artwork destroyed and her spirit crushed. Enter Sarah, the new girl in town. She was different from the other students, with her dark clothes, pale skin, and an unsettling calm that seemed to follow her everywhere. Sarah quickly noticed Emily's suffering and, in a rare moment of courage, Emily confided in her about Rachel's torment. Sarah listened intently, her eyes gleaming with a strange light as she suggested a solution, one that involved the dark arts. At first, Emily hesitated. The idea of performing a ritual seemed absurd, but Sarah's words were persuasive, dripping with a promise of retribution that Emily couldn't resist. Desperation pushed Emily to agree, not fully grasping the depth of what she was about to unleash. It felt like a chance to finally turn the tables on Rachel, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted so many times before. But as the sun set over the ancient town, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over Emily's heart, hinting that this was only the beginning. In the dimly lit attic of Sarah's old house, Emily nervously watched as Sarah prepared for the ritual. The space was filled with strange, ancient symbols drawn in chalk, and the scent of burning herbs hung heavy in the air. After Emily confided in Sarah about Rachel's torment, Sarah had listened with an unsettling calm, then proposed an idea that sent a chill down Emily's spine, a ritual to teach Rachel a lesson. At first, Emily balked at the suggestion, but desperation and curiosity wore her down. Sarah's quiet confidence and eerie knowledge of the occult both frightened and fascinated Emily. She couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah knew far more than she let on. Under Sarah's guidance, they crafted a small effigy of Rachel, a crude but eerily lifelike figure made from twigs, cloth, and strands of Rachel's own hair, plucked from a comb Sarah had somehow acquired. Sarah insisted that the effigy be placed at the center of a pentagram drawn in salt on the floor. As they began to chant strange, guttural incantations, Emily felt an unfamiliar rush of power. It was intoxicating, the sense of control and retribution she had longed for. But with that power came a creeping fear, a gnawing doubt that whispered she was crossing a line she could never return from. The candle flames flickered ominously as the ritual intensified, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw the effigy twitch. Her heart raced, torn between a newfound sense of strength and a deepening dread that something terrible had been set in motion. The morning after the ritual, whispers rippled through the school corridors. Rachel had arrived late, her usual confident demeanor replaced with a haunted look. Dark bruises blossomed on her skin, visible even beneath her designer clothes. She winced with every movement, complaining of searing pains that no doctor could explain. Worse yet, she confided in her closest friends about the voices, whispers that seemed to follow her, mocking and sinister. Emily observed from a distance, a storm of emotions brewing within her. The connection was undeniable. The effigies inflicted harm mirrored in Rachel's suffering. Sarah, eyes gleaming with a disturbing satisfaction, urged Emily to continue. "She's only begun to understand," she whispered. Reluctantly, Emily agreed, each step deeper into the abyss weighing heavier on her conscience. They performed another ritual, this time twisting the effigy's limbs into unnatural positions, chanting incantations that made the very air seem colder. The next day, terror gripped the school as Rachel collapsed in the hallway, her body contorting grotesquely as if unseen hands were manipulating her. Bones snapped audibly, and her screams echoed through the halls. Emily's initial thirst for revenge morphed into dread, realizing the ritual's power was far beyond her control. The line between justice and cruelty had blurred, leaving Emily ensnared in a nightmare of her own making. Rachel's suffering reached its unbearable peak one stormy evening. The entire school was abuzz with rumors of her declining health, but no one could have anticipated the horror that awaited. In a final, brutal twist, Rachel's body began to contort violently, her bones snapping and flesh warping as though something monstrous was tearing her apart from the inside. Her screams were inhuman, echoing through the darkened halls as her body twisted into grotesque shapes, her once beautiful face now a mask of agony. Then, with one last, sickening crack, Rachel fell silent, her lifeless form collapsing into a twisted, unrecognizable heap. Emily, paralyzed by fear and guilt, fled from the scene, her mind reeling from the realization of what she had done. Desperate for answers, she ran to find Sarah, hoping that her strange friend could somehow reverse the horror they had unleashed. But when Emily reached Sarah's house, she found it abandoned, the attic empty, and no sign that anyone had lived there for years. The reality hit Emily like a cold wave. Sarah was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the echoes of dark rituals and the weight of Emily's crushing regret. Emily returned home, now deeply shaken, the enormity of her actions weighing heavily on her soul. She had sought revenge, but in doing so, she had unleashed a force far darker and more powerful than she could have ever imagined. The knowledge that she could never undo what she had set in motion haunted her, a silent curse that would follow her forever. The once innocent girl who only wanted to end her torment was now bound to a nightmarish legacy, forever marked by the evil she had helped summon. The Witch's Game. In a secluded village nestled within the Black Forest, Germany, ancient legends whispered of dark forces that lingered in the shadowy woods. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the forest's eerie power, a place where few dared to wander. Hans, a timid boy with a kind heart, was the favorite target of Klaus, a cruel bully who thrived on Hans' misery. One cold, overcast afternoon, Klaus's torment took a sinister turn. He chased Hans deep into the forbidding woods, far beyond the village's edge, where the trees grew thick and twisted, and the air was heavy with dread. As they ran, Hans stumbled upon a decrepit cabin hidden among the trees, its roof sagging under the weight of time, the walls covered in creeping ivy. Klaus, catching up, laughed cruelly, but his bravado faltered when he recognized the cabin. It was the home of Francine Stein, the old witch whispered about in fearful tales. Hans' terror and Klaus' malice simmered in the air, drawing the witch's attention. Inside the cabin, a dark force stirred, sensing the perfect ingredients for her next ritual. Francine Stein emerged from the shadows of the decrepit cabin, her eyes gleaming with malevolent intent as she observed the two boys. She could taste the raw emotions swirling between them, Hans' paralyzing fear and Klaus' burning hatred. With a voice as cold as the grave, she beckoned them inside, her twisted smile promising a sinister end. The air inside the cabin was suffocating, thick with the scent of burning herbs and something far darker. As the door creaked shut behind them, Francine Stein began to speak, her words laced with dark magic. She explained that their powerful emotions were exactly what she needed for her next ritual, a spell that required the energy of hatred and fear to unlock its full potential. Hans trembled, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but Klaus, ever the bully, sneered at his fear. "What's the matter, Hans? Scared of a little old lady?" Klaus taunted, but his bravado only served to amuse the witch. With a wave of her hand, Francine Stein sealed their fates, chanting an ancient incantation that filled the room with a sinister energy. The boys were suddenly paralyzed, unable to move as the witch's spell took hold. The binding spell began, pulling their darkest memories to the surface. Hans was forced to relive every cruel word, every painful encounter, feeling the sting of Klaus' torment with unbearable clarity. Simultaneously, Klaus was plunged into a nightmarish vision of his own cruelty, confronted with the consequences of his actions in a way he had never imagined. Their minds and emotions started to intertwine, blurring the line between victim and tormentor as the witch's magic grew stronger. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pulsating with dark energy, as Francine Stein watched with cold satisfaction. The ritual had only just begun, and already the boys were trapped in a hellish cycle of pain and fear, their fates forever bound by the witch's dark power. The witch's incantations grew louder, echoing through the dark cabin as the ritual reached its horrifying peak. Hans and Klaus, once distinct in their suffering, now found themselves entangled in a shared nightmare. Klaus, who had always reveled in his power over Hans, was suddenly overwhelmed by the intense fear and helplessness that had been Hans' constant companions. Every insult, every blow he had delivered now reverberated back at him with terrifying clarity. At the same time, Hans was plunged into the depths of Klaus' rage and cruelty, experiencing the twisted satisfaction Klaus had always felt in causing pain. Their minds spiraled into a nightmarish loop, each boy drowning in the other's darkest emotions, unable to distinguish where one ended and the other began. The torment was relentless, a vicious cycle of suffering that blurred their identities until they became almost indistinguishable. Hans' timid nature was crushed under the weight of Klaus' aggression, while Klaus' arrogance shattered beneath the burden of Hans' despair. As their minds merged, so too did their bodies. The spell's dark power began to twist and contort their forms in grotesque ways. Bones cracked and reformed, skin stretched and fused, as the boys' features blended into a monstrous amalgamation. Their once separate faces twisted together into a single, horrific visage, eyes wide with terror as they screamed in unison. Limbs elongated and fused, creating a nightmarish, misshapen creature that writhed in agony. Francine Stein watched with cold satisfaction as her creation took shape, the twisted, monstrous form of Hans and Klaus now a living vessel for her dark magic. The boys, once bitter enemies, were now inseparably bound in a fate far worse than either could have imagined. their suffering fueling the witch's power. The transformation was complete, and with it, their humanity was lost forever, leaving only a grotesque entity, writhing in eternal torment under the witch's cruel control. The ritual reached its dreadful climax as Hans and Klaus were fully merged into a single, monstrous entity. Their bodies and minds were no longer separate. They were fused into a grotesque abomination, a twisted reflection of their worst qualities. The creature's form was a nightmarish blend of their features, a living testament to their eternal torment. Bound together in a hellish existence, they were now a powerful conduit for Francine Stein's dark magic, controlled by her will, and doomed to serve her for eternity. With her creation complete, Francine Stein led the monstrous fusion out of the cabin and into the shadowy depths of the Black Forest. The village remained blissfully ignorant of the horror that now lurked in the woods. Hans and Klaus, once bitter enemies, were now forever trapped in a shared nightmare, their hatred and fear fueling the witch's power. The final twist revealed that Francine Stein had long awaited this opportunity, knowing that the darkness within human hearts would one day provide the perfect fuel for her unholy rituals. The doll maker. In the decaying town of Eastern Europe, where cobblestone streets wound through crumbling buildings, Sophia, a young artist, found solace in her paintings. But her life was a waking nightmare, tormented daily by Irina, a wealthy girl consumed with jealousy over Sophia's talent. One day, Irina's cruelty reached a new low, destroying Sophia's precious artwork. Devastated, Sophia fled, tears blurring her vision as she wandered the dark, twisting streets. Lost and desperate, she stumbled upon a hidden shop with a sign that read, "The Doll Maker." Inside, the eerie, lifelike dolls stared back at her, and the old, reclusive doll maker offered her a chilling proposition: revenge in exchange for a personal belonging and a drop of Irina's blood. Sophia hesitated, her heart pounding as she considered the dollmaker's offer. The idea of revenge was intoxicating, but the thought of using dark magic frightened her. Yet, the memory of Irina's cruel laughter and the destruction of her artwork fueled her anger. Consumed by her desire for retribution, Sophia finally agreed to the dollmaker's terms. She handed him a silk handkerchief she had taken from Irina's locker and, with trembling hands, pricked her finger to offer a drop of blood. The dollmaker accepted these items with a knowing smile, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. He began his work immediately, crafting the doll with an almost supernatural speed and precision. As Sophia watched, she felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. The dollmaker's hands moved with eerie fluidity, molding the doll's features into an exact replica of Irina's. The closer the doll came to completion, the more Sophia's anger gave way to a creeping dread. But it was too late to turn back. Her thirst for revenge had blinded her to the consequences. When the doll was finished, it was a perfect likeness of Irina, down to the cold, disdainful expression in its glassy eyes. The dollmaker handed the doll to Sophia, his voice low and foreboding as he warned her. "Once this doll is set in motion, there is no turning back." Sophia clutched the doll tightly, a twisted sense of power coursing through her veins. Yet, as she left the shop, a creeping fear gnawed at her, whispering that she had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. Not long after the doll was created, Irina began to notice something was terribly wrong. It started with small, unsettling moments. Her hands would twitch involuntarily, and her feet would take a step without her willing it. But soon, the movements became more violent, her limbs jerking as if controlled by an unseen puppeteer. Panic gripped her as she struggled to regain control, but her once graceful movements turned stiff and mechanical, her body no longer responding to her will. With growing horror, Irina realized her flesh was becoming cold and unyielding, her skin taking on a strange, porcelain-like quality. She was slowly, terrifyingly, becoming like a doll. Meanwhile, the doll that Sophia had brought home began to exhibit behaviors that chilled her to the core. At first, it was just a blink here, a slight tilt of the head there, but soon, the doll's movements grew more pronounced. It started to mimic Irina's voice, repeating phrases she was known for, its tiny mouth moving with unnerving accuracy. The doll's eyes, once lifeless, now followed Sophia around the room, as if it were truly alive. As days passed, the doll grew increasingly animated, while Irina's body grew stiffer and more doll-like, her humanity slipping away with each passing moment. What had started as a quest for revenge now turned into a nightmare. As Sophia watched in horror, realizing that the doll was not just a replica, it was becoming Irina. The satisfaction of her revenge quickly soured, replaced by a deepening dread as the doll's eerie resemblance to Irina became more than just physical. It was as if Irina's very soul was being transferred into the cursed creation, leaving Sophia to grapple with the horrifying consequences of the dollmaker's dark magic. Soon after the doll's creation, Irina felt a terrifying change. Her limbs began to jerk uncontrollably, as if pulled by invisible strings, her once graceful movements becoming stiff and unnatural. Panic set in as she realized she was losing control over her own body, her skin turning cold and unyielding like porcelain. It dawned on her with growing horror that she was transforming into a lifeless doll. At the same time, the doll Sophia had brought home began to come to life in unsettling ways. It blinked, tilted its head, and even spoke in Irina's voice, mimicking her with chilling accuracy. As days passed, the doll grew more animated, while Irina's body became increasingly rigid, her humanity slipping away. Sophia, once thrilled by the prospect of revenge, now watched in horror as the doll took on a life of its own, realizing too late that she had unleashed something far darker and more dangerous than she ever imagined.